everybody. This is Scott Steffen from Aegis Defenders.
Probably shouldn't look into the mic. Hi, everybody.
This is our first time recording anything where we're both on camera, so we are learning as we go, learning on the job, as it were. Which Bryce is already hopefully directing this recording session.
Yeah, we might want to look into the camera.
Yeah, that might.
I don't know.
You know, it's like a talk show. Do people look at each other on talk shows? I don't know.
Well, they don't look into the mic, that's for sure. We could look at each other. That'll work.
Yeah, I also have like a lot of this back and forth movement, like just generally, and
I'll just like physically
like,
correct you.
I actually at E3 when I was giving an interview for Anamnesis, there was this woman who like actually like grabbed me and was like, "Stop." So anyway, you guys are watching on YouTube, so it doesn't matter. This isn't pro. You know, we're just here chatting about Kickstarter.
Right. Yeah.
So this is Bryce. You can introduce yourself.
I'm Bryce Coe. I'm a game director on Aegis Defenders. Also do all the art. That's what most of you probably know me for.
Yeah. It's all Bryce's imagination.
Onto the page.
Amazing. He's a workhorse. You can see it behind us here. Our beautiful set design.
We didn't just put that there for this.
No, it's always been there. It's for inspiration. So anyway, we wanted to do a video companion piece to the Gama Sutra blog articles. The articles, I think, might tend to be a little bit drier. There's more numbers. There's more like concrete advice to them. But we also wanted anyone who was interested in crowdfunding to also just sort of be able to hear from us a little bit more anecdotally. So we're going to be here talking about part one of the article, which was deciding to kickstart and getting ready for the Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get that started, Bryce, some people might be familiar with the history of Aegis Defenders, but I actually joined onto the project by the time you and Leafu had already had a demo and kind of concepted the game.
Right.
So if you want to talk a little bit about how Aegis Defenders got its start before we kind of joined up, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, so it started out as like a student project at USC. It's just interactive, intermediate game development class. So it's like not even like advanced. It was we were doing that while we're taking a bunch of other classes. So in the beginning, it wasn't going to be this big whole thing. We just started making a game, and then once we started testing it with people, we were like, hey, actually this is really fun, and we think we could do something with this. Why not? And it was around that time that like Kickstarter had kind of just started burgeoning. I think Hyperlight Drifter had launched shortly after we finished our demo.
This had been 2013.
Yeah, around then. So
it's the fall of 2013.
And it was at that time where we said, hey, if other people are just gonna make a game, like why not? And so that's what started the discussion. Obviously, it wasn't like as immediate as making that decision. I think in the beginning we were like, hey, let's do a Kickstarter, and we'll do it in like a month or 2 months. And then like now that's like so funny to think about because it ended up taking like 9 months to really get ready. Yeah. And yeah, that's how it began.
And I sort of ended up coming onto the project because Bryce and I had worked together at a game studio here in Los Angeles called Game Desk, which does really cool learning games. They recently did this weird like Avengers museum kiosk about science.
Oh, really?
I don't totally understand it, but it looks really great. But Bryce and I were both graduate students at USC. I was in the Interactive Media and Games program, and you were in TV and film production?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, cool. And I was actually working on another project at the time on this cross-screen iPhone project, and I saw you in the hallway, and I came to find Bryce to be like, hey, do you want to do some artwork for this cross-screen iPhone project? Because we were like transitioning into this interactive storybook thing. And you and Leafu were demoing Aegis. Yeah,
you weren't even a scheduled playtester. I was just like, oh, hey, Scott, what are you doing here?
And I made my partner at the time, Anna, I made her so mad because I was like, I'm going to go ask Bryce if he wants to do this artwork. And I think it didn't come back for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. So I was just playing the Aegis demo. Back then it was called Aegis, it wasn't Aegis Defenders. And she's just like, where were you? And I was like, I just played the best game. Like, you play one of the cool things about being at a game school is that you get to play a lot of cool stuff. A lot of it is half-baked. Right. And it just felt like immediately, like, you guys had found what was really cool and fun.
Thanks.
About the game. And I think it was a couple weeks later you sent me an email being like, hey, we want to do this Kickstarter and we need someone to help produce it.
Right.
And I think initially I was like, no, I'm too busy. And then I was like, I would much rather work on Aegis Defenders than work on this like weird storybook thing. So the moral of the story is to always shirk your responsibilities in favor of other responsibilities. But yeah, so that was January of 2014. Or late January, early February.
No, that was in at least December.
Well, yeah, the play testing. But I think when we finally formally sort of like had our first
when we got together,
that
was January.
Right.
Yeah.
And you and Lifu had originally said that you wanted to do the Kickstarter in March.
Right.
Which at that point in time I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. And then it very quickly became clear that was not going to work. But so let me ask you, when you decided to do a Kickstarter, was that because other funding options felt out of reach, or did it just seem convenient, or what was the thinking?
Well, it was that we had all the tools that we needed to make the game, right? So we were working in Unity, and Unity can export to all these different platforms. Working with Sony or Nintendo wouldn't really require anything other than us showing it to them and them liking it, right? So we didn't need like that much funding to get it done. So working with a publisher or asking, just our family friends for money didn't seem like it was going to be worth the effort. Whereas if we did a Kickstarter, we could remain independent. We wouldn't have any strings attached to it because you just make the thing, and that's just what we wanted to do.
And one of the challenges, so we initially decided to do the Kickstarter, and then we sort of began production on the trailer and all of the assets and getting ready and starting the actual legal business and the million tiny things you have to do for a Kickstarter. But I remember initially sort of thinking, I don't know, I've completely lost my train of thought. I'm gonna have to cut
That's fine. It was one of the things that I think.
Oh, it's the money. It was getting the money. That's what it was.
Okay.
It was so hard because we were looking for about $150,000 to $200,000, and it was like too much money for a lot of independent publishers, and not nearly enough money for larger publishers. And I even remember when we talked to somebody at a talent agency, and it was like, if you were looking for a couple $1 million, they were like, we can get you $1 million. And it was like, well, we only need 200,000. It was like, at that point, it wasn't enough for them to bother with us. So really our sort of development budget was also a little bit of a hindrance to getting funding through more traditional mechanisms.
Right.
If the game had been bigger or more ambitious or in 3D and we needed like to pay a dozen people and get new computers and all this stuff, it almost would have been easier to get the money.
And that's one other thing too, is that in the beginning we thought it was only going to be like $50,000, and there was plenty of people saying, "Yeah, I'll give you $50,000," but you have to reach this goal and this due date and everything. But it wasn't until we did more and more research into all the real costs of development that $50,000 really is like a drop in the bucket, And doing it for 150 even still is a lot of like from us, what I mean? Like we have to give up a lot to do that.
Yeah, we'll get to a lot of that stuff when we start talking about the ask, but the $150,000 budget was really that's almost not a realistic budget for it isn't a realistic budget for 3 people to be working on a game even somewhat full time. Like if you and Lifu were working at market rate, that $150,000 would barely cover it.
No,
for
it wouldn't.
It
wouldn't.
Right. So
and that's why if we had only gotten our ask, we would just have to give up even more things from our own life, or just work harder for free for longer, So
let's talk a little bit more about the process of actually developing the Kickstarter assets. I think we really started with the video. I mean, I feel like that was the first.
Yeah, that was the first step.
Thing, and that turned out to be the longest.
Step
as well, and the most important, which is the next Gamma Sutra blog article will be like all about the video, because it's a place where I think we see the most obvious mistakes, and it's also the point of entry for so many people. So it's also the point of exit for a lot of people if your video is not very good.
Yeah.
But that went on for 4 or 5 months. I
think it was in January that we first sat down and I basically storyboarded every shot.
Right.
And it was just like, we're gonna need, you know, a scene with this in it. We're gonna need a scene with this in it, and we're gonna need this, right? And you know, we can actually put that on the blog too, and show them like how similar that first storyboard was.
Yeah, I think it's really pretty close.
It's really close, but it still took like I think
a long
6-7 months.
Yeah,
right?
there were some segments we cut out of there too. There was like
there's a little bit
cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was hectic. And it was something that led us to delay the Kickstarter a couple times. So initially we knew that like the March deadline was just crazy and wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think the next deadline was in June, and then we started getting close to June, and it was like, well, June's clearly not going to happen. And so then we timed it to launch, I think, a day before or during Anime Expo.
Yep.
So we would kind of have this booth at Anime Expo, and people would come, they'd be able to try out the game, and then they would, you know, hopefully then pledge on Kickstarter.
Yeah, so a little bit of word of mouth. We gave away free posters if they signed up for the newsletter, just to like
really
get people's names down.
Yeah.
And then hopefully they would, you know, tell their friends or whatever.
And then we ended up delaying one more time because it just didn't feel ready yet. And I think every one of those delays made the Kickstarter incrementally better.
Yeah.
It was probably, you know, worth its weight in whatever time weight. Worth its weight in gold. Wait, WAIT, that's a pun. Worth its weight in gold. So that was, I think that's the thing too. Sometimes I see people, they'll send us their Kickstarter and it's like 2 weeks before launch date, and it's like, just stop, take another month. Like, you only get one launch day. There are Kickstarters that go back to the well and do multiple funding campaigns, which I personally am never totally comfortable with, but you only get one launch day, so make sure it's good. And then I think the decision to delay, even though it was painful and it drove Brian and I crazy as producers, it was the right decision.
Well, let's talk about what those delays were really quick. Yeah. So the first one we said we're going to do in March, right? Was because our demo was basically ready. You know, it's like the game is fun. Like that same demo we had done in December is the same one we showed pretty much 8-9 months later. But you know, nothing else was ready. We didn't have a trailer that was gonna show off how fun that demo was, and we didn't have copy that was going to, you know, entice people with rewards and everything. And so the next time we were almost about to launch was right before Anime Expo, when the trailer was done, but then we still didn't have really good copy. We still didn't have figured out what our rewards were going to be exactly. And so that was the third delay. And basically those are the three ingredients that we thought you would need to have a Kickstarter, which is the demo, proof of concept that the game is good, a trailer that shows off that game, and then a Kickstarter that actually, you know, communicates what it is.
I think didn't the sound effects go into the trailer maybe just a week or two before?
It was ready at the same time. Yeah. We showed the trailer at Anime Expo with everything in.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But yeah, all those things take time.
Yeah. Really, I don't know. Sometimes that's just the biggest tip. Is just take your time. You only get it once.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing that I think was really helpful in hindsight was that mailing list. I think the mailing list was never huge. I think right now, when we went to Anime Expo, it was 3 people.
Before
and
now.
it had been up on the website for 2 months, and I've been begging people to sign up for it. It was 3 people. And then I think at Anime Expo we got a couple hundred. It was up at 300 or 400, or for Anime Kanji it was 300 or 400. And then by the end of Anime Expo, we basically said, "Hey, you get a free poster if you sign up for the mailing list."
And then that's when it took off. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think now it's up around 1,100 people, which is not a ton, but those were the people who were the most excited to hear about the game. They were the people who were the most excited to tell their friends about the game. And I think day one, having that list, being able to say to 1,100 people, "Hey, the game is out. Go tell your friends."
It's better than 3, right?
Right.
You know.
It was almost like every one person on that list was really having 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
And by far, people who pledged from sort of word of mouth resources, and Twitter and Facebook, and coming straight off the mailing list link, pledged substantially more than people who kind of came from press articles and things, and we'll get to that whole breakdown when we start talking about press and marketing. But
and some of those people come up in the comment sections of other websites saying, yeah, I saw these guys at Anime Expo, and they're not like, you know, goofballs or whatever.
I remember at Anime Kanji, we made t-shirts to sell to hopefully defray the cost of showing up at that show. I think we spent about $400 or $500 on that show, sort of making reservations for the booth and for travel and food and everything.
So that was the first convention we went to.
Right.
We eventually went to 2.
Yeah, this was in April, late March.
Yeah, or I think April.
It was in April.
Yeah.
And that was really cool because I think it also helped legitimize us to ourselves. Because I remember we sold a t-shirt one day, and the next day I saw a guy walking around with a t-shirt on, and I was like, I guess we're doing this. Like, I don't want this guy to have bought a t-shirt and not have like an actual product, you know, in a year or something to sort of...
Yeah, it's surreal when you see someone else like wearing your product like it's a real thing because then it's real to someone else too.
Yeah.
You know? So.
And I mean that really helps. I think business cards were another thing. Like we had business cards, and I was like, here's this business card for this business that like sort of only exists in our head, but then like it exists to other people, and it just I think psychologically helped legitimize the business to me. So I don't know if anybody out there is looking to sort of drum up their enthusiasm, like kind of putting some skin in the game, like putting yourself out there, making yourself responsible to other people, helped a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think since Lifu and I are like more developers, we don't, well, at least I didn't have that issue with it being like a real thing.
Right.
But I think that's a really good tip. Like if you're recruiting people or you're talking to other professionals, like at game conventions like GDC or whatever, like you kind of need that proof that you're taking it seriously.
Yes, yeah,
you know?
And that helped a lot.
Yeah.
There were a number of, when we were auditioning composers, there were a number of composers who said like, oh, this is the best email I've ever got. Because like we sat down and really wrote out an email that was like, this is what we're looking for, this is who we are. Taking the time to do that kind of detail work and to be prepared for situations. I mean, like at GDC, somebody's going to get 150 business cards, and 100 of them are going to be like from Vistaprint on like the cheapest possible paper stock, and sometimes it's just like going that extra mile, making sure you have a nice looking business card, and just legitimizing yourself in the eyes of others is a really great way to just sort of get out there and stand out a little bit.
And you'll make a lot of connections if you go into GDC with that sort of business card, because they'll just like remember you at least. I mean, once we started the Kickstarter, we got a ton of emails from people who were like, oh, I remember seeing this game. Yeah, it's probably a whole nother talk, but like when networking with people, like having our business card have like basically a screenshot of our game and being like, that's what it looks like. It's like way better than like, here, let me show you what's on my phone. It'll just take a second. And even if it does just take a second to pull it out on your phone, having that business card and immediately then being like, whoa, what is this? I can kind of already feel what the game is. You know, it's helpful.
And I mean that just helped in the whole psychological preparation. Like we're doing this thing; it's an actual thing. This thing is moving.
Yeah, spending money.
The second biggest thing I think that happened to us early on was that we just started sending emails to other Kickstarters. So very early on, we had two really great calls with the team at Yacht Club Games who did Shovel Knight, and with James Petruzzi from Discord Games who are putting out Chasm, which I think is actually out on PS4 soon. I don't know when, but soon. And just talking to them was incredibly helpful because it turned out there were 10,000 things that we didn't know about that we now know about.
That was huge.
I think the Twitch and YouTube marketing thing was a big one. I think just hearing numbers from other people, I don't remember who it was, but somebody was talking about like you're gonna get 1 million emails asking you to set up like a PayPal thing, and you're gonna do it. You're gonna make like $10. And sure enough, like we got 1 million emails asking you to do the PayPal thing, and we finally did. Towards the end, we set up a Slacker backer campaign that raised $1,500. It's not nothing, but it's not as much as the proportion of emails that we got would suggest. It was just learning what to look out for and what to be prepared for. It was really helpful.
I mean, one of the huge things to me was that we knew nothing or thought nothing of reaching out to YouTubers or streamers, and the fact that for a couple of the other Kickstarters out there, that was their main source of revenue. I don't think it was for us, after the fact, but for some people it is. So it's something we didn't even consider.
And we got a couple of big ones. I think the Northern Lion review picked up. Another thing to think about when you're getting ready for your Kickstarter is scheduling, like what time of year, what day, what hour, what minute. But a really big thing when you're kind of looking at the calendar is to avoid big events. So I feel like there was an event right before our Kickstarter, and then we ran into PAX in the last couple days, and we really got screwed because I don't remember who it was, but Brian lined up some huge YouTuber, and the guy was like, "Oh yeah, I'll put my video up on Thursday," and the Kickstarter was over on Wednesday, and we were like, "No!" So just whenever you're getting ready and picking a date, just pull out the calendar and make sure that because literally any other piece of news is going to be bigger than your Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So picking a time that's going to be a little dry will always be helpful.
Yeah, avoiding big events. Where gaming conventions are always the worst because for the next 5 days that's all anyone is talking about. And then I think during PAX they put us up as one of the games that was at PAX on game trailers, and I'm like, no, we're not there, but that's nice.
I'll take it.
And then also general time of the year I think is really important. There's not as much facts to back it up, but I think Kickstarter showed that in previous years January is just almost dead after December because people have spent all their money, and then I think summertime is generally a little bit weaker than spring, just because people are on vacation, they're not staying at home, playing games, especially students, I think. So there's a lot of factors, those are things that matter, and you can't just launch it when you're ready.
I mean, there's almost a temptation to be like, oh, it doesn't matter, there's always people out there spending money, but it definitely does, and we'll do a whole day-by-day breakdown later on in the Kickstarter, but Fridays were great days for us because people get paid, and then they have extra money in their pocket, and then they decide to back your game. That is a very true thing that happens. It's not a fiction in your head.
Right.
And Thursdays were universally terrible for us. We had one Thursday where for a short period of time we'd actually lost money. Yeah, somebody backed out at the last minute, and we were negative $200 on the day.
Right. I think somebody pulled out $500. And we had only made $450 up to that day. So it's well, this isn't going well.
That'll happen. So we actually ended up launching on a Wednesday, which I think was a combination of both practicality. It gave us a couple days to lead up to the weekend and seemed to be a good funding day. Yeah. And also a little bit of good old-fashioned voodoo mysticism that seems like Wednesdays.
Well,
now on a Thursday.
What I think is that weekends generally there's less people browsing the internet, and that's what everyone else says also. Right. I don't know if it's actually true because we had pretty good weekends. Yeah. But generally, on Monday, people come back from the weekend and they want to actually work, right? Or feel like they're not slacking off on Monday, and then you want as much of the work week when they are ready to slack off and start looking at Kickstarters for you to be available to them. So when you launch, it should be on a Tuesday or Wednesday, so you can maximize the amount of work week you have of people who are browsing.
And I think we launched pretty early East Coast time. I think it was 8 a.m., which would be 11 a.m. On the East Coast.
11 a.m. on the West Coast. Yeah.
Well, I thought we launched 8 a.m. here on the West Coast, and it was 11.
Right, I have that. That's the way.
Yeah. So, but the idea was that, and I used to do marketing for a small gourmet peanut butter company. We used to send our newsletters out at a very specific time, so that we would kind of catch people at their desks when they come back from lunch and don't really feel like doing anything. And there's actually these scientific studies, and it has to do with blood sugar. You eat lunch, and an hour later you get a little drowsy, and people just stop working for an hour or two in the afternoon. And so we definitely wanted to sort of hit two of those waves in the afternoon of people who came back to their desks and were just goofing off on the internet. So it's nearly impossible to say how much that actually worked, but it seemed to.
I feel like all of the information we have supports like launching earlier in the morning, in the middle of the week, because it's just available to people longer. If you launch, and because you want your first few days of launch to be the biggest days, because they set your momentum for the rest of the Kickstarter. Even though you get a big boost at the end as well, like you have to already kind of be somewhere before that boost matters, right? So.
And it's also, launching that early gave us time to email press contacts that we lined up who said like, oh yeah, just tell us when it's live and maybe we'll cover it. Like it gave us a couple hours to kind of rev up that machine. Yeah. And start tweeting and begging people to fund, and just kind of gave us a couple hours to get up to speed versus if we'd launched it later in the afternoon and people are already going home, and so that was good. So this is actually it's running longer than I thought, which is great. More content.
We could talk for hours about this stuff.
We could, but I think as we're getting towards the end here, is there anything that you wish that we had done differently in the run up to the Kickstarter, or things you wish you had known?
That's a pretty tough one.
I know for me, towards the end of the Kickstarter, I wish I'd saved a little more energy, because it was definitely, there were weeks at the end where we were like, oh, we haven't even emailed the 100 anime websites that we have email addresses for, and I was like, I can't send another email. It's just like there were opportunities that were kind of coming up that were just slipping through the cracks because everybody was so tired. I think that's probably inevitable, but I do wish, I don't know, maybe we had thought more about the pacing or something.
Yeah,
it might just be inevitable.
I think one of the things that really helped us, like one of the few triggers during the middle of the Kickstarter, where that trend usually is, some of the things that actually brought it up were like cross promotions with other Kickstarters. But because most of these other Kickstarters had never heard of us before we had launched, we couldn't prepare for them, Sure. And that's one thing that I think we could have done a lot better, is like if we had kind of contacted other Kickstarters or other developers about like cross promotion before we launched and had time to prepare those things, we could have had a lot more impact. That's right. True. Yeah. I know that we kind of we had talked to Shovel Knight before we launched, but we didn't have all it finalized. Right. And so putting together our trailer and putting it out there in the best way was a little bit stressful. Yeah. Because one thing that you don't know going into a Kickstarter is just how exhausting it is. Knowing that any second of the day you might, make your goal, or when you're not making money, you feel like, oh, it's because I'm not sending out 1,000 emails right now. So having all that stuff prepared just so that we wouldn't be as exhausted during the Kickstarter, would have probably saved a few years off the end of my life. I was just so tired and so stressed.
Actually, this is a funny anecdote. You just said shave a few years off the end of your life, and I recently went to the doctor and they were like, you should stop eating all this food and you'll live longer. And I was like, have you seen the end of someone's life? Are there more things I could eat that would keep me from becoming a decrepit old person in a hospital bed? So it may have done you a favor there. Anyway, I think that's true. But it's also, in that run up where you're just looking at the copy for typos and you're begging people to cover the game. It was hard to have the foresight.
Yeah, it's true.
You know what? We should really get that locked in.
Right. Yeah. Because beforehand you're worrying about everything else that you think is important. For example, one thing I wish I had known too was that press doesn't necessarily translate to anything. No. So you're oh yes, we're gonna get the Kotaku article or the Gama Sutra or GameSpot or whatever website is your favorite, and you really want to get those. And maybe you'll get a ton of views because of them, but the audience of people who actually back Kickstarters is not the same people who read gaming websites necessarily. Yeah. So it's knowing that it's more important to go after people who actually back Kickstarters than just people. I mean, that sounds common sense, but knowing that distinction.
Well, it's true now. Sometimes on Rock Paper Shotgun or Kotaku or something in the morning, and I see this one game and it's coming up all the time, and I'm like, oh man, I wish we got press like that. And then their Kickstarter comes out and they make $600.
Exactly.
It's
right.
It's almost impossible to predict. And, I think we both have our thoughts about why those things fail to fund, and that's really what the rest of this series is about, is trying to I mean, but we are by no means, magical sorcerers who have all the answers for Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
But we thought long and hard about our Kickstarter, and I think we have some things that we see over and over that we can say like, that's a thing that could have been fixed that probably would have saved that Kickstarter, or at least gotten further along. And that's what this series really is about trying to deconstruct our success in as many ways as we can so that we can share that information.
And I think, as you were saying, like how the market kind of changes, like the people that we talked to who did Kickstarters gave incredible advice, but the landscape also had changed drastically by the time we launched, even between the time that we started talking to them. So some of this advice may not be as precise anymore, but like general like things that you should do or things that you'll forget, like those things are really important.
All right, any last thoughts before we sign off for the day?
No. Just that I want to get back to work.
Great. Yeah, get back. Great. So thank you everybody for bearing with us. Hopefully this was as helpful as the article was to many of you.
I wonder if I was here the whole time. I
don't know. It wasn't. I took my glasses off because the screen was reflecting, so like I can't. I'm just hoping this actually recorded. Okay. That's what I'm hoping. Anyway, if you have questions for us, leave them in the comments. We'll answer them in the next video. As always, feel free to email us. I like to give advice, and we like to look at other people's Kickstarters. Feel free, please, to contact us. You can find our email address either through the little YouTube username link here, or you can just send it directly to me at scottstephan@aegisthegame.com. That's SCOTTSTEPHAN @aegisthegame.com. Otherwise, we will talk to you guys soon.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See you around.